Someone at work starts yelling at them a certain way and they just go off and they lose their job. What caused you to go off? Like, and in that manner. We talked about that last part, dealing with triggers, right? Because like, why did you spaz out so much that you lost your job? Like me, like when I was in the situation that I call the biggest building block, right? Like I knew I was going to do something, but why did it have to be that overzealous? That's what I started asking myself. You just said, okay.
Okay. Just pressing play.
What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? I am your host, Kieran Smith. Welcome back to the Geeks podcast. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. It helps the video a lot, helps push it up the algorithm, so that would mean a lot to me. And today we are back talking about Mental Health Awareness Month still. I have my lovely co-host with me behind the camera.
Hey.
My wife. Yeah, my lovely wife, my beautiful wife. And we're going to continue on with Mental Health Awareness Month. Today we are talking about triggers and therapy. Last pod we talked a little bit about triggers.
Yeah.
Right? So I hope you guys are getting a lot from this. I enjoy mental health as a whole. My wife did make a good point when I told her I'm kind of sad it's coming to an end. She said, you know, most people only pay attention to it in May and then they don't really go past that. So I'm thinking about going a little bit past May with this whole thing. We talked about triggers in the last pod. So today we want to talk about triggers and a little bit about therapy and how they kind of go together and how therapy helps you with your triggers. So I believe it was yesterday. Earlier, I was watching Harley Initiated. Shout out to Harley Initiated YouTube channel. The two fellas were on there interviewing Judge Lynn Toller and the divorce court judge. Yeah, she's popular for just going ham on TV. So they were interviewing her and they were talking about, you know, marriage and like kind of how to beat divorce type of thing like that. And she talked about something that stuck out to me. You know, she kind of talked about her parents and how they were with her, you know, and about, you know, raising your children to be weak. Like she said, you know, you should raise your children to be polite, you know, and to be kind, but don't raise them to be weak, which I thought was a great point, you know, so very true. But she also made another statement when she talked about her father being born in 1919, I believe, and her mother being born in 1930. And it immediately made me think about the generations, right? So 1919 would be the greatest generation. 1930 would be the silent generation, I believe. You know, and she said that, you know, her parents raised her to just, you know, move forward. It didn't matter, you know, what people thought, to push forward. And honestly, a lot of the things that she was dealing with was nothing compared to what, you know, they had went through. Which at the end of everything she said, I said, she's very right. You know, she's very right. And that type of parenting is not unfamiliar to me. You know, granted, now my mom's a baby boomer. So I believe Judge Lynn and my mom are in the same generation. So that parenting style is a little bit more different. We talked about how my mom was a lot more open-minded, you know, as a mother versus the generation prior to her, my grandmother and my great-grandmother. It was a lot different. But nonetheless, what she said was true. It just also stuck out to me, especially from a cultural standpoint, that this type of parenting, sometimes I feel like there could be some experiences that happen or take place in our lives and they could be overlooked. And you don't really know the ramifications of the experience, like what it's going to have on the person, how it's going to manifest in this person's life as they get older. You know, granted, just because somebody makes fun of you doesn't mean your world should end, you know, but it's still a pivotal moment in a child's life or a young person's life that can also shape, you know, how they are relationally with people, you know, as they grow older and they have more relationships with people. So I just thought it was interesting how she pointed that out. Not to raise your children to be weak, and I don't think we should ever raise our children to be weak. But self-awareness I think is important because.
Crucial, yeah.
Right. You're absolutely right the way you said it. Crucial. Because I don't think it's wrong for something to happen to a child, like them being made fun of or something bad happening to them, a fight or anything that can cause any form or type of PTSD in their life, and help them realize, like, hey, what happened to you wasn't fair. Like, this wasn't a good thing. This is not something that, mommy and daddy support or people should support, and we're gonna move on from this. Like, we're gonna be strong, we're gonna realize what happened here, and we're gonna move on. So, and I don't think that she didn't mean that shouldn't happen. I just thought it was interesting because she's talking from what she's experienced, and that's the way her parents were. She's like, she would go home and tell her parents, maybe crying about something like the teacher wasn't nice to me, or they didn't put me in a certain type of group, and her father would kind of just look at her and say, did you get 100 on the test? Okay, no, so I'm not talking to you right now. And it's funny because a lot of my friends whose parents are from the Caribbean are especially like that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, they're especially like that. So I'm not unfamiliar to that. I just thought it was super interesting, like when she brought that part up, almost like, if you do go through those things, just keep it pushing. It's whatever. It doesn't matter what people say to you. And essentially, it's not like what someone says is going to end your world per se. But we are going to talk about that next, right? About the impact and the power that words do hold.
Oh, yeah. That'll be very, very helpful and good.
Yes, the whole sticks and stones may break my bones, but words, it's like, it's just not true. Words definitely hurt.
Yeah, I think people forget. It's because we can't really get into it yet, but they just hold a lot over somebody.
Yeah, I think that's the worst ditty for children to have.
Yeah.
Like, that's the worst, like, child, like, it's a horrible song.
Yeah.
It's almost like giving a kid permission to just be evil, right? So yeah, it really stuck out to me when she spoke about it from that perspective, because I was like, yep, that definitely sounds familiar. But now, especially with millennials and Gen Z, a lot of mental health disorders are being talked about now, and they're also being recognized. They're being given names, so it's not all strange and unfamiliar anymore, and like such a I don't know, like, it's not such like a bad thing to be talked about.
Yeah, because at one point it's like it was a bad thing because they didn't know and they just classified it as crazy.
Yeah, it's like, we don't talk about that, like we don't mention that. So it's a lot more open now, especially with the last two generations. So I just thought that it was interesting that was her perspective. But here in the year her parents were born in, she's a little bit of an older baby boomer. So it's like, it's old school all day. If we think about the generational data we went over, and we go to the baby boomers, and then before them the silent generation, then before them the greatest generation, those people are cut from a different cloth.
Oh yeah, we could see that
Yeah.
a lot. And that's why, like, the millennials and Gen Z, we're just not willing to, like, be quiet about certain things either. And I think that's interesting for us.
Yeah, I mean, in our defense, some things we probably should be quiet about. In a sense where it's like, I could see where we can get that nickname the entitled generation, because it's just like millennials. It's like, if they have something to say about something, they're definitely gonna say it.
No hold back.
Yeah, even if it's a passive millennial, which I think is hilarious.
It's funny. It just takes a little longer to get there.
Yeah, definitely. But to branch off of what she said. Right. So there can be some traumatic incidences, whether at home or in school, amongst friends or distant family members, that can happen in a child, right, or a young adult's life. And triggers can form. And not only can they form, but they can form and we can be totally aware of them forming.
You mean like unaware?
Yeah, like we could have no idea that a trigger has formed because we were made fun of.
Yeah.
Or because the way mommy and daddy raised their voice when all I did was drop a glass of milk, or the way I got beat because I did something wrong, or what I got beat with. We don't realize that triggers can form from that.
Oh yeah, like the other day when we were sitting there, I don't remember what we were doing, but there was snapping going on. And you remember that, and you were like, "Oh, you don't like that." Or was it in a movie we were watching? But anyways.
Oh, this is me when I was at work.
Oh yeah, you did tell me that.
Right, yeah, and with my mentor, and I know it was something he did without even paying much attention, because it's not something he often does, and he didn't do anything wrong. But remember, I said I noticed it, like I felt it in my own body, and I noticed it, and that's from my therapist telling me to pay attention to my body when things happen. You know, so he was on the phone, and the atmosphere, the environment we were in was kind of loud, and I also had some podcast playing in the background of YouTube, and he couldn't hear the guy on the phone because the guy had like a weird accent and he spoke really fast. So he was trying to get my attention to turn the volume down, and he kind of went like this, right? And I did look and acknowledge him to see what he wanted, and you know, my eyebrows kind of looked, you know, like I was a little taken back by it, but you know, I turned it down. I didn't think anything of it. But then it's like, as a couple moments would pass by, I started to say to myself, like, I didn't like that.
Yeah.
You know, like, why did he snap at me like that? Or like, and then as a couple more moments passed by, I said, well, why does it bother me that he snapped at me like that? A question that I wouldn't have asked before spending some years in therapy. I wouldn't have asked, like, why do I feel like this? Because I would have, let's just be transparent, I would have felt entitled to feel like that.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody did something to me that offended me, so I would have felt entitled that I could feel like that. But instead, you know, being healthier at a different point in my life, I was like, well, why did that bother me? You know, like, did something happen, like maybe at some point in my life with snapping, and it was just like a complete turn off to me. And that's really all it was. Instead of being in an unhealthy spot and harboring something against a mentor whom I love so much, which it would have made no sense. It would have been totally stupid.
Yep. See why it's important to be aware of your trauma and triggers, because it pours over in areas where there's no need.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, so for people who are not yet in therapy, or they're just starting to go to therapy, what is it, like, how, I know you've heard from your therapist, like, okay, start to pay attention to your body, but what was it on your part that you had to do so you could become aware of everything? Because it was more than just hearing her say that. Like, what did your process or practices look like? Oh,
I could answer that, but we would be getting a little bit ahead of kind of towards the last thing I'm going to talk about. No, but it's true. I can answer it briefly without going too in depth, like we're going to in a couple minutes, but I would probably say practicing being present.
Okay.
Yeah, practicing being present. But you also have to poke at those uncomfortable spots that you might not want to touch in order to figure out why something might be a trigger, right? So at some point, you're going to have to get transparent with your therapist, because you're only going to get out of therapy what you put into it. And nobody's going to force you to tell you your story. No one's going to force you to do that. So you just have to get transparent at some point.
So you're saying you have to be, in those situations, you have to put yourself in a situation to where you might possibly be susceptible to triggers, to understand, like, where that trigger comes from?
No, more so that you have to be honest enough to tell your therapist maybe a situation that happened and all of your actions in the situation. Because sometimes when things happen, people are people are quick to talk about what the other person did, but and all the while paying attention to the other person and how the other person's offending them, but they're not keeping track of their own actions. Like, they're not keeping track of what they're saying, how they are feeling, the way they are responding to it. So if you give your therapist or life coach or whatever example you know, and you tell them like, well, this is what I said, this is what I did, this is how I responded, they can start to work on some triggers with you just because they can see like, okay, so the person said this and you reacted like that. And the person did this and you responded in this way. And then you guys can start to work on things, but there's a lot of transparency that has to take place. We don't like to tell on ourselves as humans.
Oh, no, and I sure didn't. I didn't even think, you know, another thing that I've learned in therapy is people who struggle with a certain part of trauma, like sexual trauma. It's hard for them to take accountability because they don't know what it looks like, and they don't even, they're not, dissociation might be at play, you know, to know things.
Yes. So let's take a look at a definition of triggers.
Yes.
You have to run downstairs?
Yeah, they just called.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so you are going to read us the definition of the clinical definition of triggers?
Yes.
Okay.
What is a trigger? In psychology, a trigger is a stimulus that causes a painful memory to resurface. A trigger can be any sensory reminder of the traumatic event. A sound, sight, smell, physical sensation, or even a time of day or season. Apart from trauma, the term trigger is also used in other mental health contexts. A trigger can be anything that activates or worsens the symptoms of a mental health condition, such as obsessive compulsive disorder or substance use disorder. For example, a person with contamination type OCD might be triggered by the sight of a dirty doorknob and react with extreme fear, or a person with alcohol use disorder might be triggered by the smell of alcohol and suddenly start craving a drink.
Yeah, that so a little bit before you finish, you read something where it said that it worsens. Mm-hmm. Does it worsen something that's already there?
It worsens a trigger can be anything that activates or worsens the symptoms of a mental health condition that's already present.
So I think it's interesting that they use the two words activate and worsen, because those two words are implying that there's already something wrong.
Right, right.
You know, like, so even if the person can't see it, like it's implying triggers. If a person has a trigger based on that definition, those two words activate or worsen, they are literally implying that there's something presently there. Like it's not like you know, because if you were going to activate something, you couldn't activate nothing.
And something can't get
right.
worsen if it wasn't
right, and something couldn't become worsened if it didn't even exist. You know, right. So that's a lot of this stuff is going to be dormant until something does happen with a person, right? And then of course we can moderately get into fight or flight responses, right. But that's kind of what happens. Like you get triggered and then it's kind of like you come to a point where fight or flight's activated. Yeah. You know, like which one's gonna happen. And really there are more than just two responses, but the ones we see most commonly are those two, you know. So I just thought those two words were very interesting when we were going over, you know, the clinical definition of it. Because what's some of the first things you'll hear somebody say? I don't need to go to therapy. I don't need a therapist. There ain't nothing wrong with me. Yeah. I don't got no triggers. Like I don't got no bad responses. I don't need that stuff. But it says that triggers become activated or worsen depending on what's happening to you, what's going on, and some type of pre-existing, right, has to already be present in order for it to become activated or worsen. So I just think it's very interesting when the first thing most people go to is that I don't need to go to therapy. There's nothing wrong. And it's like everyone has triggers.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the degree in which a person reacts to their triggers is going to vary.
Oh, yeah.
Because that depends on how triggered the person is, what type of trauma is unresolved, You know, how long the trauma took place, what age the trauma happened at. A lot of that stuff does matter as well too.
Yeah, it does.
You know, so I just think it's very interesting, and I hope that you guys keep that in mind as well. That activate or worsen. Like we all have dormant triggers, and if they're not dormant, it just might be maybe your trigger. Maybe it takes a lot more for you to become triggered than it does me, or maybe it takes a lot less for me to become triggered than it does my wife. But everyone deals with this to some degree, and it doesn't mean that you're crazy or something's wrong with you. Every single person deals with it, and triggers can vary. We'll see that as well. Someone might be triggered by a smell that was in their house as a child, and all of a sudden at work they can smell it, and it might bring back a good memory. It could bring back a horrible memory. So varying degrees of how people react and how long or if you get triggered.
Yeah, but you're right. Everyone does have it. But I do like how you use the word doormat, because since they're already, you know, it activates it more or worsens, they are basically like sleeping, like hibernating. So it's pretty...
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about, you know, the biggest building block, I believe, that it was that finally got me in years of therapy. But I wouldn't say that my triggers were dormant. I would say that most of them were very much awake. But this particular trigger, based on what I saw and what was happening at the moment, I wouldn't say that one was dormant, but I would definitely say homeboy was knocked out, you know. But the minute the situation happened, you know, he was like, oh, what's going on? What we doing? You know, like it was crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, like these are things, guys, that like everyone deals with. We all deal with them. So don't hear the word trigger and think, oh, this doesn't apply to me because nothing's ever happened to where I got bothered. Maybe nothing big enough has happened yet, or small enough. But nonetheless, there's something we all deal with. So because triggers can form, right, from things from childhood, young adult, we see that there has to be some type of pre-existing state, right? Because they're saying activate or worsen, right? What are some things that can cause these triggers to even go off or happen? Like, I know you got something over there you're going to read for us, but what's some things that even cause these jokers to pop off?
You ready?
No.
Stop. You already know.
No, I'm ready.
So some of those things, well, first and foremost, triggers come in all shapes and sizes, and they're unique to each individual. It's not an exhaustive list, but here are a few common triggers. Holiday or anniversary of the trauma or loss of somebody. Certain sounds, sights, smells, or tastes related to the trauma. Loud voices or yelling. Loud noises. Arguments. Being ridiculed or judged. Being alone. Getting rejected. Being ignored. Breakup of a relationship. Violence in the news. Sexual harassment or unwanted touching. And physical illness or injury. So, can you, just because I know you can definitely relate to this, violence in the news, how can that be triggering? Or what's your experience with that?
Just by listening to it, hearing it, you meditating on it, you're taking it in. You know, it's going to be a thought process that you go through once you're done listening to it. I just think that list that you read off is like, it took me back when I first saw it, because I'm like, these are things that happen all the time. Like that list didn't list anything that was, I can't even say overzealous in any way. It's literally normal things that happen constantly, because you don't have to necessarily be in an argument with a family member or a spouse or even a child. You could just, people get into arguments at work. So they're saying loud yelling can be a trigger for someone. And that automatically like already breaks my heart for a person that probably has some unresolved trauma in their background, and someone at work starts yelling at them a certain way and they just go off and they lose their job. You know, like they're gonna be beating themselves up and doing all kinds of things, but they can't answer the question. And the main question being not why, not you went off so someone was yelling at you, or why did you go off, but what caused you to go off. Like, and in that manner. We talked about that last part, dealing with triggers, right? Because like, why did you spaz out so much that you lost your job? You know what I mean? Like me, like when I was in the situation that I call the biggest building block, right? Like I knew I was going to do something, but why did it have to be that overzealous? That's what I started asking myself. Yeah, like we gravely underestimate the things that we watch and we listen to. You know, like you can't meditate on crap like that. And you don't have to be watching something all day long to meditate it. You just have to watch it or read it or see it, and it just be in your mind.
Oh yeah, it could be a couple seconds and that's it.
Yeah. And then you're like, I mean, case in point, you ever been driving to work in the morning, or maybe we're going somewhere and you hear a song on the radio and then it's like all day you can't get that song out of your head?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, so it matters if you're listening to NLE Chopper at 9 in the morning. Like, I mean, I don't hate NLE Chopper. I mean, you know what I mean? He's not, I don't particularly and personally listen to him. I'm just not at a point in my life where I'm into rap music like that anymore, especially like just, you know, just where they're doing a lot. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just not into that anymore at this point in my life. So I could not digest that at 9 in the morning. I would like be all over the place mentally if I did. I couldn't digest that at 10 o'clock at night, you know. But like some people think like, oh, I just listen to, NBA Youngboy song, or I just listen to an NLE Chopper song, or I just listen to, whatever, Lil Baby song or Future or something. And I'm not saying that, that person's wicked or they're wicked for listening. I'm just saying that if the clinical definition of a trigger is that sounds, sight, hearing, smells, all of these things can trigger someone, then it makes sense why you can listen to a certain type of song at a certain time in the day and it has an effect on your day.
Oh yeah.
Whether you're going into work or you're about to go to bed. So another case in point, you ever been listening to a song, maybe it was a rap song, really early in the morning, and then like maybe when you started listening to it you were fine, and then you got to work and it's like all day your work day just feels like it's long and it's annoying, and you're like, why am I here today? And it's like, why am I here with people today? Why isn't everyone dead and I'm the only one alive? Like, it's like you start thinking like all of this stuff, and it's like you don't even realize it's because one of the lyrics in the song was this and this. Like we just kind of just do it without putting much thought into it, with our mind being off, right?
Oh yeah.
And next thing you know, it's just kind of like, wait a minute, why do I feel like this? I was literally just fine at 7. Why do I feel like this at 9:15?
And we're trying to figure out reasons other than that.
Yeah. And I think it could be a trigger. Clearly music can be a great trigger. It can bring you back to a great memory.
Yeah.
But it could do the total opposite.
So
that's why being mindful of what you listen to, what you read, what you watch, what you take in. People don't realize that we can cause ourselves harm in a sense where we can trigger ourselves and not even realizing that that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Or that's the path we're walking down. Like, I'm literally walking down a path where I'm about to trigger myself and start acting crazy because what I'm about to do. I've done this plenty of times, guys. Just being transparent with you, I have. So I think it's also safe to say that with these triggers laying dormant, it's probably hard for a person to know that they have these. And firsthand, I could say that there were some triggers that apparently were triggers for me that I had no idea that was a trigger.
Oh yeah, I can relate.
You know, like not until I started doing some deep work, I literally had no idea that that would be a trigger. Perfect example, the snapping thing at work. You know, no idea that that would be any type of trigger. Not, and I didn't get angry or anything like that, but I noticed that it bothered me. And sometimes we don't take enough time to notice that something bothers us. We're just like, that pissed me off.
And that's it, straight to that.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
No,
Like, why did this person just offend me? We don't even take like 1.4 seconds to think like, okay, that person is obnoxious and it does offend me, but why did this offend me?
Yeah.
And why do I feel this particular way about this offending me? You know? So, to your point, when you were asking earlier, you said, what were some of the things that I did so that I was a lot more aware of my triggers?
Yeah.
And I said, practicing being present, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so early on in therapy, I remember talking to my therapist about, I think we had just come off a 21-day fast.
Okay.
And I was explaining to her that I had realized during my fast that my focus was like laser sharp. You know, like there were things that normally at work I could start maybe a certain type of experiment or something. It could take me 4 hours to complete it. But during my fast, I was doing it in like 2 hours. Like literally, I was shaving off like 50% of the time, and I didn't even realize how I was doing it. So we started talking about what I do during my fast and some of the things I was fasting from. And she said, well, for one, it's going to be easier for you to work faster and more diligently when you're fasting because you're hungry.
Yeah.
You know, so that sounds weird, but essentially what she was saying is you're very present when you're hungry. It's hard to go anywhere else in your mind.
Yeah.
Because your body is hungry. So it's going to, what happens when you're hungry? Your body does things to remind you that it's hungry. Like, hello, are we going to eat yet? Hello, anytime you want to feed me. Hello, could really use a sandwich right now. So your body is going to moan and groan and grumble and give you pains and certain things to where you're present. Like it's hard to not be present, you know, because you're feeling things. So it's kind of going to keep you in the moment. So that's one reason why it was really easy for me to be present when I'm fasting, because my body's hungry.
And you know what? I have learned that from you, because I was never a big faster. But that's very true. We're going to therapy and, you know, fasting at the same time. So both spiritually and mentally, I'm there. I'm like, I was able to recognize triggers and stuff like that as well.
I think the first time she brought that to my attention in that way, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Another big component was, again, practicing presence. So there was a small exercise my therapist gave me a couple years back, you know, and she said to me, if your mind ever starts to wander off, or you feel like, you know, your mind is wandering, just start looking at things around you and pointing them out, you know. So I would do that, but I would get more and more creative with it every time I did it. So I was able to just start looking around and pointing things out, like, okay, I see this, I see that. But as the years went on and I kept practicing it, I would do it out loud.
Yeah.
Like, I know some of you guys out there have experienced this. I know my wife had, but you know, you ever been in a car and you're driving and all of a sudden you're like, where am I going?
Yeah.
Like, what was I going to do again?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's been so bad before that I was like, why am I driving? And then I was like, why am I in my car? Like, it literally got so crazy. But this is just like, and I'm not saying this is DID, dissociative identity disorder. I'm not saying it's that, to where my personality was switching to somebody different, and then I would be like, well, this me isn't driving. It wasn't anything like that, but it would be that my mind would just wander so far off that I would just pretty much forget about what I was presently doing.
That's crazy. It's like you trigger yourself by going, like, your mind going away. So then coming back into the presence is kind of triggering.
Yeah, so I would just be like, why am I in a car? Where am I going? What was I about to do? Like, and it would kick back in. Like, it would come back to me usually within less than a minute. But the first couple seconds of it, I'm not gonna lie, it feels crazy. Like, it literally feels trippy because you're like, what is happening? And I didn't realize that I would do that like before therapy. So when my therapist gave me this practice, I would get real extravagant with it as I kept going on. Like, I would say it out loud to myself. So if I felt myself, or if I caught myself wandering off in the car, I would say, all right, Q, what's going on around you? And I would say, I'm in the car. Okay, what are you doing? Or I'm driving. Where are you going? I'm going to work. Okay, what's in front of you? 2 cars, a blue one's on the left, a red one's on the right. All right, what's behind you? 3 cars. What's on the left side of you? What stop sign do you see? What did that sign just say? And I won't have to do it very long, but I could do it for about 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. And then it's like, I'm just back. Like, I'm right there in the moment of exactly what I'm doing. So I like vehemently like practice this thing. Like, after she gave it to me, I practiced it all of the time. And even when my mind didn't wander off, I would just practice it just to make sure I was present. Like, I understood what was going on around me. Like, if someone just came in and out the room, who came in and out the room? Who came behind them? Who came before them? Like, just asking myself to see, because we go throughout so much of our day with our minds off sometimes and we don't even think about it. A lot of your day, you do it without thinking about it.
Especially because it's virtual, Monday through Friday, go to work, go to bed at this time. So it's natural.
Yeah, a lot of your day you do without necessarily actively thinking about it. It's just kind of routine based, and your body's used to the movement, and it knows that this time you're going to do this and at that time you're going to do that.
Yeah.
So it was important for me to practice presence. Now, with practicing being present, my awareness of my triggers came up.
Yep.
Because when you're present, you can think, and you can think about what's happening right then and there. Sometimes when you have arguments and you have triggers, those triggers can take you backwards, and you'll leave the present argument and you'll all of a sudden be 15 years in the past.
Dissociating yourself,
right?
Yeah.
Right? You'll be 20 years in the past. You'll be 5 years in the past. So the more I practice being present, the more that when triggers would get pulled, pushed, or whatever, I was able to say, like, okay, me and my wife are having some passionate fellowship right now, but it's not because I'm mad at her. This is because this happened at work earlier. It made me feel like this. I didn't really deal with it 4 hours ago, so now I still feel like this. And now I'm putting extra energy into this, and it doesn't need to be here. So that's where it was a priceless cheat code.
It really is. It definitely has helped me also not trigger you or other people, because our triggers can trigger other people, especially depending on our response.
Especially when we don't know them.
Yep, absolutely, which is a very hard thing to swallow once you become aware and you're a Christian and stuff.
Yeah, causing your own self PTSD or trauma based off the behavior that you're doing, and you're calling it, that's just me, or this is how I react, or when A, B, C, or D happens, this is just what you're gonna get. No, fam, like, you need therapy.
Yeah, my mom did that, so now I.
Yeah, it's like you need to work some things out. You know what I'm saying? Especially those of us that call ourselves believers in Christ and Christians, because I tell people all the time, that's your lens. Like, I'm not saying what has happened to you doesn't matter. It does matter, because these things have an effect on us, and then they later on manifest some way, shape, or form, whether we're a horrible friend, horrible spouse, horrible child, horrible parent. It manifests some way, shape, or form, right? But it's like, no, like, there's some real deep, like, soul work that needs to be done. It can't always be the excuse of, like, it's because of A, B, C, and D. Once you identify what it might be because of, you need to go do some work on it.
And it's hard to, it's not easy to be transparent with yourself, but it's honestly very relieving. Once you start to do it, it becomes so natural that you look forward to being able to, get the chance to be honest about things.
Yeah, when I talk to people about therapy, what I don't like is I don't like when you have done the work and people are like, well, you just make it seem easy. Sometimes I'm like, no, you just make it seem hard.
And very complex. We all remember.
Honestly, because it's not that therapy, like in time and the tears and the digging wasn't hard. It was hard. I seem like I'm making it easy because I've been doing it and this person might be new to it. But what I'm saying is that we try to take something and go so far with it instead of, again, being present. 1 second at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day, right? 1 week, 1 month, 1 year at a time. Like, you can't do anything faster than that. But as someone who was there, when your mind is all over the place, you try to.
Yeah, and it's also coming from a place, for someone who has been through it, they act that way because it took them. It's not easy. I don't think you think it's easy. I don't think therapists that are, spiritually healthy and mentally healthy, I don't think they think it's easy. They just know that it's possible.
Right.
And with it being possible, that's enough.
Right. Yeah. That's where a lot of therapists get their capacity from because they've done this work with people before.
Yeah.
So they know, like, listen, if you just keep at it, if you just build some consistency, if you just keep taking a step forward, like, you'll start to see it. But starting that journey and then staying consistent on it, on any journey, honestly, to recovery is not easy, but you have to want it. I got to a point in my life where I wanted those answers. Like, I got to a point where it wasn't okay anymore for me to tell people I was doing what I was doing because that's just me.
And yeah.
Like, it wasn't even that they didn't accept the answer. It was more like I got to a point where I didn't accept that answer.
And you will, yeah.
Where I was just like, this doesn't even make sense what you're telling people. You're telling people that you can act like a condescending a-hole because you just grew up like that.
Or because you had A, B, C, D, and E happen to you when you were young.
Exactly. It's like this type of justification is wicked and it's harmful.
Well,
like, literally, I got to that point of thinking about it in that way. Because I knew I wasn't being honest with myself either.
Yeah.
I knew I was telling myself something, but I knew what I was telling myself wasn't the honest thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's where it gets... So, again... This type of work is not easy work to do. We're not professionals. We're just giving you things from our perspective, our life experiences. Anytime we've gotten it canceled, we don't cancel people. But anytime we've gotten a chance to counsel people, mostly in a spiritual capacity.
Yeah.
We're just telling you our experiences and what we've seen, and based off our own work that we've done.
Yeah.
We don't want you guys to be afraid of therapy or triggers or anything dealing with mental health. Like, it's okay. We're mental people because we have minds and we have a brain. So it's normal. It's normal at some point for all of us to question what we're thinking, what we're feeling, how we're processing things. So we hope that you guys enjoyed this podcast episode. We hope that you got a lot from it. Next episode, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into therapy and talk about some statistics. Stay tuned. Remember, encourage somebody during Mental Health Awareness Month and share the love of Christ with them because it can heal anything and anyone. We love you guys. Peace.
Later.